can ask someone a question like, oh, what do you think about this?
Yes.
And you lead them on
Yes.
to elaborate their own thinking
Yes.
with questions, like probing questions.
Yes.
You get them to articulate it. And then
Yes.
on the other side of that, you could be like, well, the world works like this, this, and this. You need to do this.
Okay. So I see this, and I think that it has to do with, again, the attitude and whether you approach people with a fallibilistic attitude, because none of us can make infallible self-ascriptions. We're all prone to make mistakes, whether we're talking about ourselves or about other people. So it seems to me that it is good if we try to talk to other people and try to make them see the world the way we see it, but also tell them that we could be mistaken. It seems to me that this is absent in lots of cults, because there is supposed to be a kind of blind obedience to the authority of someone. And if a person, let's say if a friend of mine was involved in what I think is cult or cult thinking, I would tell them.
Well,
and
I think that's
in that case,
yeah.
In that case, this could be seen as forceful. But I would tell them, I think that what you're doing is problematic. I think that it is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. But the difference
harmful.
there is you're not using your power as, an authority figure to say, okay, I'm deprogramming you. You need to go through with this. Sometimes they would, get this through legal means. They would use the backing of, say, the justice system or something like that to forcibly deprogram someone, rather than you giving a friend who, the power dynamic is, your peers, aren't you?
Yes.
And so you're not using your authority to tell them how the world is. You're speaking from a point of concern. They can kind of take your advice or leave it, if you will.
I can definitely see, though, how that could take place in a concrete context in which if that person could stop thinking me as a friend,
mm-hmm.
for instance, and then I could be, I would tell them, listen, you're an ideologue, okay? You're a cultish member. I would speak in a more authoritative manner. I don't think, because I would not want to necessarily force the other person to see the things the way I see them, but I would want to wake them up. And I don't know, and I think that in some cases, you need to get some people to wake up at what they're doing. If you see someone heading towards a crevice and they're going to harm themselves, I think that if you care about them, you have to tell them somehow. And they may not want to listen. So how do you get them to listen there?
Well, you can never make someone listen. And if they're so resistant as to ignore healthy advice and things like that, then you've almost done and exhausted what you can, because at the end of the day, you can't forcefully change someone's mind, can you, really? They've got to be willing to do it, which is one of the problems with brainwashing in the first place, is that for someone to have their mind changed, they've got to be open to the idea. Mm-hmm. If you're completely set on an idea being true, no amount of evidence or argument or anything is going to change your mind by definition. And so you can only do so much. And I think that when it's getting to the point where someone is unable to see an outside perspective on their situation, then you start getting into sort of mental health areas whereby they're so lost inside their own head that even an outside perspective completely, brushes off their back. It's, they're basically indifferent to it. And that point seems to be one of the points whereby it's very difficult to help someone. They've kind of got to be willing to help themselves. And this is one of the things we see play out in lots of cults, is that someone joins a cult, people try and convince them out of it. They're not convinced. And then they go into the cult, have some bad experiences, and then eventually they start changing their mind. Well, maybe this is bad. And then someone challenges their beliefs and like, oh, right, okay, yeah, maybe it was wrong. And then they can leave. That's the sort of blueprint I've seen for people who have just come out of cults somewhat naturally, if you will, not necessarily with the intervention of these experts, although I don't doubt that there may well have been some element of that going on. But still, I think the important thing is that the key thing is the individual's mind. That's it. It's not, you can't externally force ideas on someone. What do you reckon, Beau?
Yeah, in my experience, in real world, the real life, to convince someone to change their own mind is extremely difficult. And also in my experience is the only time I've ever been successful with it is with an extremely light touch over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Just suggest things to people, and if they really kick back on it at all, just let it go. Say, okay, fine, no worries. And then maybe leave it a long time before bringing it up again. Maybe wait for a choice moment when you think maybe they're starting to have doubts. And again, very, very softly suggest again that perhaps they're wrong and what you're suggesting is right. That's the only real way I've had any real success at changing someone's mind. If you're arguing with someone and you're butting heads in a conversation, they're not changing their mind. They're going to be doubling down, if anything, usually, nearly always. Not always, but nearly always. So if someone's absolutely convinced, sort of dogmatically convinced about something, about the truth of the cult that they're following, for example, in my experience, it was impossible to sort of sit them down and just convince them, in a sort of a hardball way, that they're wrong, that they're wrong-headed. So it's just a sort of a delicate process, I think. And you have to convince them really that they've come to the conclusion that they were wrong all along. That's the only real way. And you know what it's like. I mean, some very enlightened people, not very enlightened, but some people, you can convince them, you can paint them into a corner, and they'll say, in real time, they'll say, you know what, I was wrong. You must be right. Some people do that. I've done that once or twice. When someone's absolutely dominated me in an argument, and I've been like, okay, I've got nowhere left to go. You must be right. But it's hard to do, to sort of swallow your pride like that.
I did it yesterday.
Most people don't do that. They'll go to absurd lengths in order to not do that. Quite often, most people. But there you go. Yeah, if you can. So when someone sort of, like I say, maybe it's got to the point of being a dogma in their mind, it's very difficult, and especially if you sort of lock them up. You put them in a mental hospital. You have a panel of psychiatrists grilling them, telling them what to think now. It's probably the worst thing you could. It's not a great idea, I don't think. But I mean, what can you do? If people are, because there's different cults, aren't there? Like the Osho people are pretty innocent people, really, aren't they? They're not a danger.
Well, maybe not that Sheila lady who tried to poison the salad bar and murder people.
Yeah, she was. But the normal rank and file 2023 Osho member, I'm sure is not a worry. But then you've got people that follow, Charles Manson or something, like real killers. Keep them in a prison or a secure hospital until they're, or maybe forever, but until they've changed their mind.
With the Manson family, though, you could just lock them up and basically leave them. You don't have to challenge their ideas, because time, in jail is good introspection time. And so you would think that, oh yeah, the reason I'm here is because some random bloke told me to kill some celebrities. You've already set yourself up for a realization there.
It's not even just sort of Manson family members. What about Islamists, where their ideology is that infidels really deserve death, or apostates should be killed, gay people should be killed, and views about women being of less value than as humans and things. It would be difficult to change their mind just to bombard them with liberal ideas, liberal in the old sense, not the sort of the Obama sense. Just to bombard them with sort of fair-mindedness, the concept of fair play. Like, it's not going to work, right? It's not really going to work.
Well,
and there's millions, hundreds of millions of those people walking the earth. It's a difficult question. It's an important question.
Well, I think there's a very key difference here in that many cultists are aware of other ideas, whereas the Islamist is raised in Islam, in an Islamic culture, with very stringent rules on what happens to apostates. And so every incentive there is directing them towards maintaining their beliefs. That's part of the reason why Islam is why it is, because it's directing them towards absolute certainty about it. Whereas with cults, at least people who join these fringe cults, they're aware of competing religious beliefs because they've been raised in either a multicultural society or, you know, a Christian society that might be different to, say, the teachings of Osho or Scientology. They're aware that they might not be right because there are other ideas that could potentially be right. And although they might not see it in those terms, it still has some effect, doesn't it? Thank you for watching that clip from my series Contemplations. If you want to sign up to the website for £5 a month, you can access that series, which comes out 1 p.m. every Saturday. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.